Good afternoon, Para Wesley Bible Studiers. I really must get a play in tune or something so that you don't lose my first words or sit staring at me for a while. Yes, today we are looking at Zechariah chapter 10. Welcome to Angela and Ivan, to Honey and Neville, Stella. Good to have you with us. Hopefully George will come in soon. The tag tells me that there's nobody watching, but I'm sure people must be there if they're making comments. So, welcome. I must admit that I've been trying to get this PowerPoint together because I think it makes it easier to listen with the PowerPoint, and it's meant that I have rushed a bit. So, let's see where we go. We're going to be looking at Zechariah chapter 10, and we're actually doing up to 11 verse 3, because apparently these are the three parts of one particular oracle of Zechariah's. So although they cross over the chapter, they're three parts that logically go together. So those are the three parts from verse 1 to 5, which I think is the most sort of complicated bit actually, because it's hard to see exactly how the whole bit fits together. But I've called that the Lord visits. Then from verse 6 to 12, which I have called the Lord strengthens. And then from verse 11, 1 to 3, which I've called the Lord expands, although that actually does link back to chapter 10 as well. So as we go through this, we look at verse 1 to 5, where it talks about, if you see me looking up, it's because I've got another screen, so I'm looking up at the other screen. The Lord visits in verse 1 to 5 is actually from a word that's not used in the translation that I have, the New International Version, but that in verse 3, where it says, "My anger burns against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders." That word for punish is apparently actually visit in the Hebrew. And then it says, "For the Lord Almighty will care for his flock." And that word care for is also actually visit. So it's, let me see how I do this way around. It works out that we have the same word but with different meanings. So we have a translation in the first time correctly translated as punished, which is what God means, and then correctly translated as care for, because when he's visiting his flock, he's doing it in order to care for them. So we look at the first couple of verses. "Ask the Lord for rain in the springtime. It is the Lord who makes the storm clouds, who gives showers of rain to men and plants of fields to everyone." This is significant in this context because of the great belief in fertility gods, not only human fertility, but in the gods of nature and the gods that, as it says, send the rain. And so Zechariah is making the point here that this rain and all the things of nature come from the Creator God, who is Yahweh, who is our God. But what appears to have happened, as we see from verse 2, when it talks about the idols speaking deceit, idols, there's a translation of the word household gods. Diviners see visions that lie and tell dreams that are false. An indication that the people had started becoming attached to the local religions. They were not getting good spiritual leadership, and so they were going back to the things that the people in the surrounding areas did, the things that they probably learnt in exile. And Zechariah is saying, "No, guys, you need to sort this one out." Or God is saying it through Zechariah. It says, "The people wander like sheep oppressed for lack of a shepherd." Interesting idea that sheep without a shepherd are oppressed because they are intended to be led and shown the right way. Let me just see what I had there on the slide for you. So verse 1 and 2, there's no leadership, so they're following local gods. And then to say that shepherds is a royal motif in the Old Testament. So whenever one reads about shepherds, we are, of course, associated with Jesus, and then we associated with ourselves, all able to be shepherds of others. But in the Old Testament time, in the Jewish religion, a shepherd generally appointed actually to the king of the people. And the king was supposed to be a shepherd, not an arrogant tyrant, but somebody that looked after the people and made sure that they had what they needed. as a shepherd would look after the sheep. That's the first couple of verses. Then they say, well, what is God going to do? Coming in now and visiting. He's visiting the shepherds because he's going to punish and warn them off, but he's visiting the flock to care for them. And I quite like this thing where we go in verse 3 from the Lord Almighty will care for his flock, the house of Judah, and make them like a proud horse in battle. And so we are moving from sheep to battle horses. And I think a lot of us feel a little bit uncomfortable being called sheep. And it's often the thing that Jesus is the good shepherd and we are the sheep of his pasture. And it's a nice comforting thought. But here God is saying, you can't treat people as if they are sheep, except in a loving, caring sense. And he says that my sheep are going to be like battle horses. They are going to be strong. They are going to be proud. They are going to be able. So I quite like this. And so we should say that the Lord is our commander and we are his battle horses. That would be just as good, I think, as to say that we are his sheep. Then verse 4 is the one probably most of us has picked up as being messianic, talking about Judah. From Judah will come the cornerstone, the tent peg, the battle bow, and every ruler. There is no certainty that it is messianic. The Jewish people picked it up as messianic and recorded it like that in their extended writings. It could also just be an indication that if you take Judah as not so much the tribe of Judah, but as the southern kingdom, that from Judah was going to rise the leadership that was going to cause better times for Israel ultimately. And I guess an encouragement to those people there in Jerusalem. Remember, this is, for us, it's weird prophecy. For them, they were there right where they were, busy doing stuff. And so when Zechariah says to him, from Judah, from you guys, it's going to come the leaders, are going to come the cornerstone, is going to come the battle bow, which was the strongest sort of bow that they had in those days. And that they would be like mighty men tramping the muddy streets. But I think it probably means both. If we want to look at whether it's messianic or whether it was specifically this in Zechariah's time or a general prophecy, I think we can say it was all three. The way I said it would have been relevant to the people that Zechariah was speaking to right then. As a general principle, it's true for us that we know that God wants to make us strong and wants to help us to overcome. But then, of course, also true in the sense that this is messianic, that we know that Jesus is called the cornerstone and that he is the ultimate ruler who comes from Judah. I think, even if I was thinking about the Maccabees, and we've spoken about the Maccabees, we know that the Maccabees were from the tribe of Levi. So just to be careful about being too tribal about it, to say that it's from that community. And some of them were, in fact, Levites, but living there in the place of Judah. And we know that this becomes relevant because as we go on, we begin not talking about Judah. But let's just talk about this horseman. My commentator wasn't sure where these horsemen came in. He said he couldn't find an actual historical reference. And I wonder if, as I said, this is kind of a general truth that God wants to help us overcome, that he's referring back to the horses that were drowned in the Red Sea as Moses led the people across. And in this way, the horsemen were defeated then, and in future, God will assist to defeat the enemies. So let us go and see what happens next. Then we have verses 6 to 12, which is the next little section. The Lord strengthens. If you look at verse 6, that's what it says. It says, I will strengthen the house of Judah. And if you look at verse 12, it says, I will strengthen them in the Lord. And so those two verses make that one nice little package together, beginning and ending with the Lord saying, I will strengthen. It says then not only Judah, but the northern kingdom also. And so that is Ephraim. Ephraim and Manasseh were the sons of Joseph. So when it talks about the sons of Joseph in verse 6, or the house of Joseph, and when it talks about Ephraim in verse 7, we know that then we're talking about the northern kingdom. And so God is really expanding the people's vision, as we know that He's done all the way through this. To say, you guys here in Judah, I'm going to strengthen you, I'm going to work with you, but actually we're going to bring back more of Israel. It's not only all about you. And we know that that extension and expansion extends later on to when God invites the Gentiles, that's us, into his kingdom as well. So, yes, strengthen the house of Judah. I will restore them because I have compassion on them. And I just picked up those words there. Now they take us back to Exodus. So I started with Exodus with the horses. And as we get further on, I'm sure we've all picked up the connection to Exodus. It says, I'll save the house of Joseph. That was a word, again, it was used when Moses led the people out of Egypt and the people were saved. It's the same sort of saving. And so it is linking back. I'm not sure if I should have put Romans 9 in there. I didn't check it with compassion. But it's interesting where God says that I will have compassion on who I will have compassion. And we read about that in that part in Romans where he speaks about hardening Pharaoh's heart, but having compassion where he wants to have compassion. And so there is a link back there to Egypt as well. Then the covenant in verse 6, we are reminded of that, where at the end of verse 6, God says, For I am the Lord their God, and I will answer them. They shall be my people, and I will be their God, the words of the covenant. The word redeem in verse 8, again, redeeming from slavery. Again, it refers back to Exodus because of that. In verse 8, they will be as numerous as before. Probably also refers back to when the people had been in Egypt. And remember that the people multiplied and there were more and more and more people until there were so many that they were a threat to the king of Egypt. And then that is when Moses eventually was allowed to take them out. And so in this passage, Zechariah and God are saying to the people, remember what happened in Egypt. Remember how it all worked then. You need to know that this is the same God, which is quite interesting. Those of you that were part of the service on Sunday evening, as I said, that John 17 echoes back to what Zechariah was saying, and here Zechariah is taking it back to what happened in Exodus. Verse 11 is the one that is very clearly about referring back to Exodus. They will pass through the sea of trouble. The surging sea will be subdued, and all the depths of the Nile will dry up. And so, although that is not physically going to happen again, and not going to need to cross the Red Sea again physically, but it is a reminder and a symbol of it happened then, it can happen again. It will be a little bit different in your experience, but it will happen again. Then just the words of restoration. So as to say that God is promising he's going to step in, he's going to visit them, he's going to be with them. He reminds them of what happened in Egypt, and then he says, you will be restored in verse 6. In verse 8, he says, I will signal them, and I think we probably would all picked up that that word for signal is whistle. I will whistle for them as if he is a shepherd. So it's back to the shepherd images. As he whistles, his flock will come to him, and he will lead them on. In verse 9, it says their children will survive and they will return. Verse 10, God says he will bring them, and he says that there will be room enough for all. So the real promise of restoration. Now, this is going to be partly eschatological, if you like, referring to the end times. It's not only about Zechariah's time, because some of that stuff was very inadequately fulfilled in that period. And so it leads us forward and on to where we are living now as well. And then just to say, he speaks about defeating the enemies. He speaks about Egypt and Assyria, but symbolic because it doesn't mention Babylon and Persia and Greece and so on. Symbolic of any country or oppressor or dominating force that God will allow his people to conquer. He will be with his people. Then picking up on chapter 11 and some of the bits that I've glossed over in chapter 10, there's this idea of the Lord expands. He makes them numerous. We've already mentioned that there'll be room enough in verse 10. There's references to Gilead, Lebanon, and Bashan. I want to show you the map just so that you can see. So that map there shows the Israel with the tribes. So that was in the time of Moses. Well, not Moses so much, Joshua, as they crossed over and they took the promised land. And so you will see that Gilead is there where the tribe of Gad inherited land. Okay, as the people of Israel were conquered and their kingdom got smaller and smaller, Gad became Gilead. The area of Manasseh, north of Gad, became known as Bashan. Okay, again, that territory was lost to Israel. And up above Israel, there in the area of Tyre, not so much Tyre, but the area of Sidon, is Lebanon. And if you read Joshua chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, and also in Deuteronomy, you will see that God says, I will give you the territory as far north as Lebanon. And so what Zechariah is saying now with this is saying, you know what the territory that God promised, you know how much space you were supposed to conquer and be able to take and how much space you used to own. This is what God is promising for the future. And I guess this is the sort of thing that people in Israel hold on to now, which causes wars and a great deal of trouble. But this we definitely believe is God's promise that ultimately his kingdom is going to be big enough for all and is going to be, just so amazing and so beyond our understanding. So when we read in chapter 11, I know you would not have prepared this one. It says, open your doors, O Lebanon, so that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O pine tree, for the cedar has fallen. The stately trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan. And it's all about cutting down the forests and cutting down the thickets. And because that is what would need to happen for the people to move in and to occupy it again. Again, I don't think this ever really happened. And so we have to see some sort of messianic thing in it. And that's why I've said there, does this look forward to Jesus as much as it looks back to Moses? But I found it very interesting to see the way it does go back and the way it does link up with Exodus. And again, just one of those amazing things, the way the Bible all fits together. Right, we're going to go to Zoom, and so we're going to sign off here. Thank you for joining us, all who are here, all who listen later on, and we will see you at the discussion in a couple of minutes' time.